To our Equip to Evangelize video. We've been doing these videos over the past couple of weeks because, particularly for our congregation here at Dripping Springs, we've made a decision to try and bring 20 new souls to the church for the Lord in the year 2020. And so we're trying to create these videos that equip our members to be ready to evangelize our community. And so today I've brought on my friend and brother in Christ, Brother Matthew Morine, who's here with us. And I brought him on and to talk about his book, Natural Evangelism. That might be backwards for you there, but it's a great new book that he's put out, and he's done an excellent job on it. So Matthew, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Jacob, for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Yeah, so just so you know, Matthew preaches for the church in Castle Rock, Colorado. And do you want to tell people where Castle Rock is, Matthew?
It's 35 minutes and 35 miles south of downtown Denver, and it's 35 minutes, 35 miles north of Colorado Springs.
That's a beautiful area.
Yes.
He's lucky to work there. So, but we'll go ahead and get this started because I don't want to take too much of your time and the viewers' time. But tell us a little bit about the title, Natural Evangelism, and what's kind of the purpose behind the book.
Well, years ago, I grew up in Nova Scotia, Canada, in a very secular culture, which is probably somewhat similar to the culture we live in today in America. But they were a lot farther along on kind of the secular progressive continuum. And then I come down to Texas, and since I didn't grow up in the church, I always kind of had a passion for outreach. And then when I had an opportunity to kind of really research it and study it, I wrote my dissertation on how churches can get out into the community and evangelize and do a better job of it. And so I did all the technical work and came up with the fancy terms. But then I kind of came to the realization it needs to be simple. And I think evangelism, if it's not natural in this culture, it doesn't work. So I think sometimes in the past, we have probably created more programs for evangelism that people, it kind of made them feel awkward, like they were selling something instead of a natural approach where I'm reaching out to you because I love you. I genuinely care about you and want you to have a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that's what we see reflected in the Gospels, right? I mean, Jesus is working and the apostles are working within the rhythm of people's lives. You know, you think about the woman at the well, he's interacting with her in it's a very natural way. And somehow he's able to segue. Of course, he was the master of it. He was able to segue into these spiritual discussions and help her to realize that she had a need that she didn't even necessarily realize that she had. And it seems to be more natural.
Yeah, the Samaritan story of the woman at the well is a great kind of model for evangelism today. It's interesting. I always talk about that in the book and then in my workshops, where you see two dynamics. First of all, Jesus could be sitting back thinking, will I condemn her or have compassion on her? Because in that society, she is married 5 times. The man she's living with currently is not her husband. And in our culture, we would probably have preconceived ideas on what type of person that is. But in her culture, she's probably not empowered to even get a divorce. And so it could have been she's been put away by 5 different men. And the man that she's living with now doesn't even have the integrity or character to marry her. So when we look at her, do we think of her in the mindset of condemnation, or do we look at it with a mindset of compassion? And good evangelism is looking at people with compassion, not in a spirit of judging them for what they're not doing, but realizing that they have probably been scarred by sin in their lives.
Yeah, we actually talked about that here at the church. We're trying to make all of the teaching, lessons, prayers evangelistically focused in this year. And we talked about the compassion of Christ a couple of Sundays ago and how Jesus viewed people as victims, not simply or not as enemies. You know, he saw them as victims. And the frustration even that he had with the Pharisees wasn't because he hated them, but rather they were victims of a mentality that he was frustrated, that they couldn't see, the need of the people around them. And what, are we moved by compassion the way Christ was moved by compassion over the masses and over the people in sin? I wanted you to comment, if you don't mind, on you mentioned an experience that you had not long after you obeyed the gospel and how you were wanting to really interject Jesus into your conversations and kind of something you learned from that. Why don't you tell the viewers that story?
Are you asking about the story of the girls on the bus?
Yes.
People like that. Yeah, everybody likes that. When I was gone, I was actually in Dallas this week and doing a workshop, and someone came up to me and was like, tell the story on the bus. Tell the story on the bus.
Yeah.
So I'm a brand new Christian, and I'm going on this public transportation, which I rode every single day to go to this community college. And I saw these two girls almost every single day. Well, this day, one of them gets on, and they're having this conversation about how one of them cheated on her boyfriend that weekend. So I was listening or eavesdropping on this conversation. And so I remember leaning in and saying, fornication is a sin. Because, there was no disagreement if this was a sin or not. And I don't think those girls ever heard the word fornication in their life. That's a Bible Christian word. And they're like, forna what? And so I lectured them for the whole trip to the school about how Jesus, God, doesn't want people to commit fornication. So I get off the bus that afternoon. One of them, not the fornicator, the friend, gets on, and I go sit with her because I'm like, obviously, this is providence. God is working here. And I sit down waiting for her to say, oh, thanks for talking to my friend. Thanks for really highlighting that. I think I see water. That's not what I got. She rebuked me. Now, that's a Bible word, too. She chewed me out. Yeah. And I realized that's probably not the best way to bring Jesus into the conversation in a natural way.
Mm. Well, but what I appreciate about that is that what you're not saying is, hey, don't talk about difficult issues, because you go on to say after that sometimes it seems like we've kind of maybe overcompensated in not wanting to have substantive conversations. I think under one section I had here marked was, in looking at evangelism efforts overall, maybe we've gone too far in avoiding anything controversial. I think that's a point, I'd like you to comment on, because going back to that idea of like trying to sell something and almost trying to and I'm not, criticizing. I know how hard it is to come up with evangelistic material. So I appreciate all the things that we've done in the past, but it seems as if we're almost trying to sidestep controversial things instead of engaging with people on them in a loving, Christ-centered way. Why don't you comment on that?
So I put it this way to people. There's 3 different levels of a conversation. The first level is fake, facts, feelings. And what happens is, when we are evangelizing, unless the person feels comfortable with us, we'll do the whole fake thing. Oh, yeah, you're so nice, and we're just being pleasant. You could have fought with your wife, your children, you show up to church, how's your day? Oh, great. That's not real. And then we go to facts, and that's where we get arguing sometimes. But the key is, if you really want to have a natural approach, you need that person to share their feelings. And so it's not steering away from the controversial topics, but making sure that they're prepared and willing to go there with you. If they haven't shared their feelings with you, they're not going to listen to the facts with you. So the key is, sometimes we lean too quickly into something controversial, but if they haven't opened up with you,
right,
you try to talk about where they're wrong or right, they're just going to tune you out in this society.
Right. Right. So I think that's kind of those bridge building relationship moments, and that goes into natural evangelism, right? I mean, because it's not natural to talk to people that you have no relationship with about deeply controversial issues. That's very unnatural.
Or fornication.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's unnatural.
That's
natural for you to talk about that on bus.
You're not being natural.
Yeah.
You're just being judgmental.
Well, and I think that the cultural context in which we're in, if you say I'm a Christian, which I think is actually, and we don't really have time fully to discuss this, but I read an article the other day about someone who, like, their New Year's resolution was to actually say that more frequently. I'm a Christian, to find a way to interject that in the conversation, because that can actually be a bridge builder in and of itself.
Yep.
And I think that there's benefits to actually saying that. At the same time, if you say I'm a Christian, obviously in the context in which we're in culturally, they're immediately going to assume certain things, right? Whether or not those things are true. And so how we engage with people, as Paul talks about 2 Timothy 2, about being gentle. But he also said, but correcting your opponents how? In gentleness, with respect, so there's this balance here. Now, I wanted you to comment also, I'm kind of focusing on one section, but I like this section on time wasting evangelism that you mentioned. What about that?
Well, I think we have a limited amount of time, and typically you can look at various signs. Are they interested or not? And I find if the person just wants to debate with you, they're not really going to come with you. So you're looking for a couple things. You're looking for need. What is their need? It may be physical or it may be spiritual, but they have a need that they're willing to express to you. So if there's an open, honest heart, a good soil, or as we put in Luke 10, a man of peace, that person will have need. They also will listen. And so if they have the approach of, well, tell me. And here's two ways to get people to kind of prospect so you're not wasting time. If someone talks to you, I have them read the book of Mark and say, who is Jesus? If they come back to you and say, well, Jesus is this, they're interested. Then if they're still interested and they do that, you say, read the book of Acts. Tell me what we do about believing that Jesus is this. You kind of put it on them, because sometimes we will evangelize and we chase people. Right. If they'll do those two things, their heart's probably willing to listen. If they say they don't have time to get to that, more than likely they're not going to be overly interested.
Yeah, I think that's a good point in trying to make sure that people are committed, because I think that, that sometimes the sad reality is we want people to be saved more than they want to be saved, right?
Yes.
And sometimes we're almost kind of not forcing them, but they might respect you. They don't want to disrespect you or hurt your feelings. And so that's why, I always try and let people know, listen, we're still going to be friends if you say no. Like if you don't want to study, if you don't want to talk about this, we're still going to be friends. That's not going to affect that. But if you're interested, I would love to talk to you about some of this stuff and we can engage on it.
Put it in their court. Put the ball in their court. And so if they'll read the book of Mark, because every time I have somebody who's interested, I give them that homework assignment. They're texting me that night. Because they've read it all and they're curious about it. If they don't get back to you in a week or so, you could keep pressing, but probably where they are in their lives, they're not that interested. I also believe that God is a missionary and God is working in this world as well. And so we join God in that work. So it's not all on us. It's not an ecclesiocentric mindset of evangelism that it's all our job. But it's a theocentric view of evangelism. God's doing the work as well, and we join him in that process.
Absolutely. And you see that within the book of Acts, right? A lot of times we focus in on the sermons of Peter and Paul. Those are important. But if you go through Acts and highlight how often Luke mentions, and the Lord did this, and God did this, and the word of God did this, over and over again, it's showing the reader that this is not something that Jesus has kind of ascended and he's taking a step back. No, he's continuing to actively work in the world through the church, and the church is essentially joining him on a mission that he began and that he continues. And that's why Luke says, I told you about the things that Jesus began to do and teach. And there's almost this implication he kept doing it, right?
Yes.
And so you need to see that. Real quickly, tell me, because I know you're, just to let the viewers know, you're a product of natural evangelism, right?
Yes.
You know, you and tell them real quickly just about your story and how that came to be.
Well, I started going to church in Nova Scotia. In fact, I was baptized in Texas at Camp Bandina. And most people say from Texas that I'm going to be earlier in line now for heaven. And I was probably one of the last to be converted through the Jewel Miller film strips of my generation. But that gospel made sense. And when we stopped using that, and I think you even highlighted it, Jacob, we have been so critical of some of the methodology in the past, but we haven't updated it to how we do it today. So it's easy to throw stones at what we used to do. We need to find new methodologies for what we can do today. And so then I remember making the choice. I became a Christian. Then went back home for a year, and then I went down to Brand Trail. And then I've been just kind of serving ever since with that. But it was because of one family, the Garnett family, that reached out to me and changed my life.
Well, and I think that that's an incredible thing, that one family can do so much. And then the fruit that you're bearing in your life is a natural product of that. And you're doing all this. So, you know, I think it's encouraging for Christians to know that the mission that we're called to as disciples is something that the entire congregation is called to. And we're trying to find a way to naturally go about doing. That's why we've put out some of these videos where we're like, how do you start a spiritual conversation? You know, how do you invite someone to church in a natural way that's not like, you know, hey, how was the football game? Oh, by the way, you're going to hell. You know, so, you know, trying to make those transitions a little bit easier, you know.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why people feel uncomfortable going back to, you know, we feel like we have to have this program, we have to sit down, we have to know all the answers. And it's like, I just told the church Sunday night, because again, we're trying to constantly bring up evangelism. I said, listen, if you decide to sit down and study the Bible with someone, they want to go through some material like this. I gave them another tool because we're just trying to put more tools into their hands. I said, you literally just, if you're not comfortable with it, just go through and go through this, discuss it with them, talk about it. It goes through it. I said, and if they come up with a question that you don't know, just say, hey, that is a great question. I don't know the answer to it, but I'm going to look at it. I'll get back to you and we'll talk about it, you know. And I just helping our members to see that, helping Christians to see that they're not expected to lecture on someone on fornication on the bus. They're not expected to get up and preach. They're expected to just, you know, find ways of naturally integrating this into their life. And
everybody can do something in evangelism.
Yeah.
And we have turned it, and we have been so focused on personal evangelism and that methodology where one person studies with one person and studies the Bible, but it really is more group evangelism. Everybody has a role to play in the evangelistic opportunity.
Well, real quickly before we end the interview, do you have any kind of quick tips for people that you like to tell them, kind of if they're wanting some things maybe that they could integrate into their life this week to try and be more naturally evangelistic?
Pray for more workers. Pray for more workers. So a lot of times we have focused on praying for the lost, but if you look at Matthew chapter 10, the question is in 9 there at the very end, in the limited commission, Jesus says the fields are white unto harvest, pray for more workers. We as the saved have to go, because if we go, the lost will come. We don't make an excuse for yourself. Just say, hey, all I have to do is do something in evangelism. So make evangelism win this week. That means make it a priority this week. And so I know that's not incredibly, so maybe bring up Jesus where it may be natural and an opportunity to do that. Just see where it goes. God will work.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Well, Matthew, I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us and to talk about it. His book, once again, is called Natural Evangelism. You can get it through Gospel Advocate. It's a great resource. It's a really easy read. It's really not that thick at all, and so it's just easy to read. He's got some great action points at the end of the chapters that help you to kind of practically apply what you talked about in the previous chapter. So if you're interested in getting Matthew for a workshop or something, I know he's doing that on this very subject. So make sure to contact him. In fact, why don't you give them your email contact info, Matthew?
It is mmorine@hotmail.com.
Okay.
Morrine, hotmail.com.
All right. Thanks, brother. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jacob.